The last couple of episodes have been pretty interesting. Revisiting the past is something that most MaleSeiyuu fans don't tend to do. We barely look back to see how much has changed, and thus, many of us complain why we don't have something, when, looking back, we now are pretty much blessed and should be grateful for the content we have available. Which is a lot. A whole lot. After briefly revisiting the 90s and the noughties, for this episode we go into a bit more detail on the following themes: the pioneer projects, the big names in 2D and 2.5D music, the rise in popularity of seiyuu music, and the misconceptions surrounding it. This episode is brought to you thanks to PM, the hand that feeds HQ's B-Rank Seiyuu supporter on Patreon. You can also be a producer for Seiyuu Lounge by subscribing to ranks B or higher on the Hand That Feeds HQ's Patreon page. Work alongside me to craft 4 up to 8 episodes of this podcast centered around a theme or themes you want to explore, provided those are MaleSeiyuu and music related. I would love to have you on board, so make sure to check the Hand That Feeds HQ on Patreon. Link is in the description. And note that, just like the previous episode, this is a digest episode including a whole lot of information that I will explore in later episodes of Seiyuu Lounge. Rest assured that if something went by too quickly for you, I will return to some of the topics in extended episodes focused solely on those. Now, let's kick off this episode of Seiyuu Lounge. Welcome to Seiyuu Lounge. I am your host, Vanessa, and today we continue where we left off last week, the brief look at the history of MaleSeiyuu in the music industry. Last episode, I went back in time to the glorious 90s to talk about the pioneer groups, the unfortunate fluke debuts in the noughties, and character songs. There was brief talk about 2D idol groups and the pioneer projects that I will, for this episode, return to. If you haven't checked the previous episode, have a listen as both are connected, and some things in this episode might not make much sense without the first part. In case you're wondering, seldom people talk about the old school projects and solo artists unless, of course, those are still popular as of now. While I understand that most people get caught up into following the hype and supporting only active and recent acts, sometimes it's good to revisit old projects as you can find some hidden gems in there. And if you're a fan of good music, you know very well that it can be found in almost any decade, and sometimes in obscure projects and less popular artists. These hidden gems were basically hidden by time and lack of publicity, something that Seiyuu fans today take for granted, and back then was minimal and sometimes non-existent. There was not the apparatus and marketing machine behind those projects as now most projects have. That's why people don't talk about those projects. At least, that's what I like to believe it's the reason behind no one talking about them. Not enough people talk about the pioneer 2D and 2.5D projects. Usually people just mention Utapri or Idolish 7, but people tend to forget the pioneer projects. Because, let's be honest, most people don't find those cool, or weren't born yet, or simply aren't curious about it. Yet, I will be talking about those, and I sure hope you guys at least get interested in checking those projects out, because there are plenty of cool music coming from them. So, like I mentioned in the previous episode, EMU were pioneers. But what were they? A 2D or a 2.5D group? Actually, they were just a Seiyuu unit. Surprised? Or were you expecting this? EMU kicked off as a Seiyuu group. Yep, that thing that now is not that much on top of music labels' priorities, Of course, exceptions are made to the recent debuts of Sparklu, Kashkomi and Servanity. EMU was founded with the voice actors in the drama CD for Graduation M. Notice that the debut didn't stem from anime or games, but from a drama CD. You don't see that happening nowadays. It is quite unique and a really interesting piece of trivia about the start of the trend of seiyuu units. Dan, and please German speakers, forgive my pronunciation, Weisskreuz made their debut. For those that don't know, Weisskreuz consisted on Shinichiro Miki, Tomokazu Seki, Takehito Koyasu, and Yuki Hiro. What were they? A 2D or a 2.5D unit? Weisskreuz were actually the very first 2.5D unit. They were a group stemming from anime, with seiyuu performing on stage as the characters that were, in this case, modeled after their seiyuu. This is a pretty unique thing as well. The group debuted in 1998 and released multiple CDs and singles until their disbandment in 2003. Those two groups, EMU and Weisskreuz, laid the first stones for both seiyuu units and 2D and 2.5D units. Seiyuu units would end up being insanely popular in the mid-noughties up until early 10s. 2D and 2.5D units would take over the industry completely in the early 10s up until now. Marine Entertainment was really big on its seiyuu units. You can almost say that they were the very first music label completely dedicated to supporting seiyuu units, even though they are a pretty unique and at the same time weird label. DAT, Elekita Round Zero, and Mo are just some of the biggest names to join the roster when the label started supporting seiyuu in music endeavors. DAT, Elekita Round Zero, and Mo made seiyuu units cool. Some people might not like to admit it, but they were some of the very first seiyuu units that had some level of success and exposure that made people start to look at seiyuu units in a more serious way rather than just in a joking fashion. Unfortunately, the label seems to have an indie budget, and marketing efforts for any of their units are never really much focused, and very few people know about the music releases. Marine Entertainment's units, unfortunately, are all connected to radio shows, so the groups stemming from those are dependent on the longevity of said shows. If those happen to end, so does the group. That has ended up with DAT and Elekita Round Zero recently disbanding, which is a pity as they were pretty awesome and are part of the old school golden group era that made seiyuu units cool. But well, times are changing and the members needed to move on and the shows needed to simply end, so that's the end that both groups met recently. The label continues supporting seiyuu units stemming from radio shows, such as M4 and Kashkomi, but both are also suffering from the lack of marketing. Even if their quality is pretty good, there is not many people supporting those projects. But it wasn't Marine Entertainment that managed to keep that coolness of seiyuu units throughout time. They started it, but it was Trignal that preserved it. I am a fan of Trignal, but analyzing the group objectively in their early days, we have to admit that they were not that great. Their vocals were all over the place, and the generic pop instrumentals didn't make them stand out from other seiyuu units in the industry at that time. Now, the same can't be said, as they matured as a seiyuu unit and count with plenty of awesome music in their repertoire. Let's just forget about their debut releases, okay? Trigonal Seiyuu unit consisting of Ryohei Kimura, Tsubasa Yonaga and Takuya Eguchi made their debut in 2012 under Kiramune. As time passed and trends appeared and faded, as other units joined the industry, Trigonal managed to withstand all and emerged on top of all other Seiyuu units. Of course, that wasn't without each member gaining more experience and improving in the respective areas they were once weaker at. And it took quite some time for them to reach the quality level that they now have. The group has managed to survive the test of time and are nearing a decade together while releasing music with some consistency, which is a feat in itself. They have strong sales numbers and are pretty versatile as singers, with all members even taking upon themselves duties of writing lyrics at times. They are currently the most popular and successful Seiyuu unit active in the industry. When it comes to 2D and 2.5D units, we need to talk about 3 specifically: Starish, Quartet Night, and Trigger. Starish are the units that made waves in Japan and overseas. Like them or not, they were the starting point for many, now fans of the franchise, to get into 2D idol music and even Seiyuu music. Their success opened the doors to a variety of groups to come after them and achieve success. When looking back, it is awesome that one project based off an otome game with rhythm elements would end up being the start of it all. And it is amazing that, thanks to its success, we can now have the Saidam franchise, Ensemble Stars, Idolish 7 and B Project franchises, just to name a few. Quartet Night and Trigger, however, did more than just experience success once the doors were open. They went for it. They ran and they went for it. They really did. They went for that coveted #1 on Oricon's charts. And there were 2 #1s for the taking. They broke that invisible barrier that both Seiyuu and 2D groups were aiming for. Quartet Night made the first bang in the music industry. The group stemming from the Utepri franchise, consisting of Shotaro Morikubo, Tomoaki Maino, Tatsuhisa Suzuki and Shota Oi, made a tantalizing debut with Poison Kiss in 2013, but it wasn't until God's Star in 2016 that the group would experience what massive popularity is. The album shot into #1 on Oricon's weekly singles chart, selling 100,000 copies on its very first day of sales, not the week, but the very first day. This was bonkers. The group was awarded a gold record by the Recording Industry Association of Japan, which was yet another feat. The first #1 and the first ever CD to reach gold record status for male Seiyuu. And the 2D or 2.5D group managed to pull it off. It was historical. Since then, the group has broken barriers and headlined their own solo tours, which, must I remind you, they were just a 2D group to begin with. Now, they are a full-fledged 2.5D group that sells out venues in their own name, not in Utepri's name, which is, once again, mind-blowing. Their popularity really skyrocketed and it was well deserved because the quality and the lineup are simply flawless. A year later, in 2017, Trigger, trio part of the Idolish 7 franchise, consisting of Wataru Hatano, Soma Saito and Takuya Sato, managed to pull off yet another awesome thing. Yet another feat for male Seiyuu and 2D groups. They reached for #1 on Oricon's weekly albums chart, allegedly the hardest chart to rank number 1. Their sales were modest in comparison to Quartet Knights, around 35,000 copies, but the fact that they went against J-rock heavyweights and legends Bucktick, as well as K-pop sensation BTS in the exact same chart, and still managed to claim that number 1 was pretty surreal and emotional. Not only if you were a fan of the franchise, you guys know which chapter in the game I am referring to, but also if you're a fan of male seiyuu music in general and want any and every project, group or seiyuu to be successful. It sure was an emotional win for everyone. Since then, the seiyuu have promoted on magazines as Triggers, Wataru Hatano, Soma Saito and Takuya Sato, not as Triggers Yaoto Megaku, voiced by Wataru Hatano, Tenkujo, voiced by Soma Saito, and Ryunosuke Tsunashi, voiced by Takuya Sato. See what I'm saying? Trigger are no longer a 2D unit, but a 2.5D unit. The seiyuu in this case are almost interchangeable with their characters, which is pretty cool. Not on Weisskreuz levels of cool, with characters being modeled after the voice actors, but still cool. A couple of months later, and still in 2017, the A3 and Idolmaster Saidam franchises managed to pull off gold record certifications. It seemed that finally, male seiyuu and the groups they were singing for were starting to get the recognition they deserved. A year later, the Hypnosis Mic franchise picked up multiple gold record certifications. Since then, they have more than 5 gold records under their belt, which is pretty impressive. The rise of popularity of male seiyuu music and a couple of misconceptions. I've talked about it before on episode 2 of Seiyuu Lounge of how much music is important to a voice actor's career. It is a popularity booster and it might be a way to earn popularity in case they are rookie seiyuu or still rather obscure in the industry. But it has also shaped or helped shape the careers of male seiyuu that were on the brink of making their big breakthrough, but hadn't found the right project that would make them reach stardom. Singing wasn't initially regarded as a thing seiyuu could do. I refer you on that matter to episode 4 of Seiyuu Lounge. But as it's gotten more common, it has been an important part of some seiyuu's careers. Being a good singer sure has opened a lot of doors for many male seiyuu, and those that weren't or aren't great singers enrolled in singing classes to be able to partake in that alleged glory that is being part of a music or idol project. Thinking that just being part of a music project will make them popular is a misconception, a big one. Few are the successful projects. Then we have those with potential that fail to appeal to the masses. And then we have the really bad ones. What people don't usually understand is that cases like Utapri, Idolish 7, Saidam and Hypnosis Mic are rare cases of projects that skyrocketed in popularity and have since then managed to hold on to that popularity without wavering much. See for example A3 and B Project. A3 went for gold records on their debut year. Fortunately, 1 year before Hypnosis Mic completely shook the industry and started to sweep off the charts time and time again. In 2018, which is a year later, A3 were still charting high, but their sales numbers have gotten pretty low in comparison. And it's kind of weird how a group went from 100,000 copies sold to only 20,000. So 80,000 fans disappeared out of nowhere. It might have been a shift of interest in their fandom, or the project somehow lost that initial shine that attracts people. I would love to know the reasons why A3 had a meteorical rise and then they just plummeted completely after doing impressive things on the charts. Yes, the game is popular, the anime was okay-ish, and the music still sells well. You know what I mean, right? A3, it seemed like the project was going to be unstoppable. Turns out it was only temporary. Once again, it is strange where those 80,000 people went, and there's no explanation, of course. At least I don't know of an explanation behind that. But if you do know and are a part of the A3 fandom, please let me know the reasons. I am really curious about how they shifted from a top project to a project that went on a quieter tone after that. B Project as well is a pale reflection of their high popularity experienced in the past. They are yet another situation that I'd love to have more insight in. How come the music has gotten better with time, much better recently, but the project's popularity has decreased a lot? Was it because the game was discontinued recently? The changes in the production or development teams a couple of years ago? Once again, if anyone knows why this happened, let me know in the comments. So, while the popularity of male seiyuu and 2D idol music skyrocketed in the mid-10s, and we've got 2D groups claiming number ones on Oricon's charts and getting gold record certifications, we need to have our feet on the ground, because the success stories are still a very exclusive group of projects. And those can change in the blink of an eye. It's that fickle. So, while having the luck of being part of a successful music project can be a real boost for a seiyuu's image and popularity, it seldom happens because, once again, there are very few massively successful projects out there, and seiyuu need to really luck out in the projects they partake in. There has been a shift in dynamics in the music industry when it comes to character songs. Did you notice how, in the late noughties, early 10s, seiyuu didn't perform opening or ending themes in their own name? There were some exceptions, of course. They used to perform as characters themselves. It was something that I believe carried over since the early noughties, when people still doubted if male seiyuu would be good singers in their own name. But in a twisted logic, as characters they could pretend to be good singers. Don't ask me why, and yes, it sounds dumb, but let's move on. It might also have been due to how seiyuu could comfortably perform as someone else rather than in a solo capacity. Remember, not all seiyuu like singing, some simply do it because the pay is better than voice acting, and while acting they actually can pull off singing, at times pretty good singing, as characters. But the thing is, we started to see a change around the early 10s. There was a change in mentality, and seeing how popular 2D idol music got with Utapri, at least on the male seiyuu field, and then with Mamoru Miyano as a solo artist with Orpheus, it was a matter of time before male seiyuu would take their chances performing songs in their own name. Seiyuu that genuinely enjoy singing and wanted to have their feet in the music industry got their opportunities to do so through Anisong, or for those that don't know, it means anime song, which is the name given to songs used in anime, be it as opening or ending themes, regardless of the music genre in those songs. And as you might have noticed, even music labels completely dedicated to housing male seiyuu or anisong singers were created in the big year that was 2010. A big example is Kiramune. Now, if male seiyuu are singing songs in anime as solo artists, and there are seldom character songs aside from the music or idol projects, how do they sing? This sounds like a weird question, but let me try to explain you what I mean with this. If a seiyuu sings as a character, they are performing in that character's voice, right? Now, if you do that for a long time for a wide variety of projects in the music industry, examples are Soma Saito, Toshiki Masuda, and Takuya Guchi, you are bound to those singing tones or quirks and slowly start to lose your unique singing voice because you're so used to doing all those other singing voices. Soma Saito, for example, mentioned in 2018 when he was promoting his single Date that he had been struggling with finding his own voice. Why, would you ask? Isn't he already considered a good singer in the seiyuu industry? What is his deal? If you notice, up until Date, Saito was singing in a rather peculiar, uncomfortable singing tone and using some quirks that he was bringing from his work in Solids, Medicode, Twink, and Trigger. It was as if he was still singing as a character in his early work as a solo act. Now, after his struggle, he actually found a voice of his. Just listen to the masterpiece that is Quantum Stranger. If that is not finding his voice, I really don't know what it is. What happens now is that Saito, that found his voice, unique as a singer, is taking that to the 2D projects he was performing in instead of the opposite that happened early on in his career. It's odd, but it's also quite fascinating. Another interesting example is Toshiki Masuda. He was known as a musical singer before making his debut as a seiyuu. Interesting enough, his first ever singing work in 2D idol projects was in Marginal Number 4, and he was not any good, at least early on. Now you ask me, why, when he was a good musical actor to begin with? Different training is required to be a musical actor. You start developing some habits that don't work with popular music. You might round your vowels too much when singing, or try to get a lot of resonance in some cases that simply doesn't work and sounds like overdoing in pop music if you bring the theatricality of singing in musicals. Truth is, Masuda struggled in the beginning even when he was a part of Max Boys. He sounded strained, uncomfortable, and it was strange given that, once again, he had a background in musical acting. More than finding his voice, Masuda first had to polish his skills and develop a different skill set just for pop music. Eventually, he came to a point in which he is insanely consistent and sounds really confident in his singing. Now, his singing sounds smooth and filled with life, and he managed as well to find his own unique singing voice, different from when he sings in 2D projects. A quick comparison of his solo work with his singing in Idolish 7 or Undead is enough to understand this. Mamoru Miyano is an odd example. By odd I mean he sings freakingly well, but strangely his singing tone is always the same across all projects he's a part of. As Tokyo no Tepri, you hear Mamoru as a solo artist. In Freeze character songs, you are listening to Mamoru, not Rin, singing those songs. His singing tone is exactly the same across all projects. It is safe to say that Miyano sure did find his sweet spot as a singer, but he hasn't really found his own voice. Or, seeing from a different perspective, he can't pull off unique singing voices while he already has a unique singing voice as a solo act. Either way, Miyano is insanely talented as a singer, but he struggles with finding either a unique singing voice for his characters or is yet trying to find his own singing voice. As you can see, it is not that simple for a seiyuu, especially one with a lot of experience performing as characters in 2D projects, to just kick off a solo career and sound comfortable from the get-go and not sounding like a character they voiced previously. And just like that, we've wrapped up another episode of Seiyu Lounge. Hope you got to learn something useful today and hope to find you around in the next couple of episodes. Now, let me ask you a question. Are you a fan of Seiyu units? I'm not talking about 2D idol groups, but Seiyu units like DAT, Trignal, Servanity. Do you think that this is the kind of thing that is no longer a trend and we'll be seeing less and less of it in the future? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss the Hand That Feeds HQ's weekly Male Seiyu and music related content, hit the subscribe button. I'll return next week with another episode of Seiyu Lounge. Thank you for listening and see you around.